Arya kept her chin raised as the Lycan King's golden eyes stripped away every secret she'd ever kept, even though her hands trembled with the urge to either run or reach for the hidden blade at her thigh. He leaned forward on his throne, and when he spoke, his voice was silk wrapped around steel. "You smell different." Chapter 1: The Burden of Blood. The scent hit Dravane like a lightning strike. Honey and wildfire and something utterly impossible that made his wolf surge against his iron control. Across the throne room stood a woman who should have reeked of fear and submission, but instead carried herself like she was daring him to try and break her. Meanwhile, 3 days earlier, Arya's fingers trembled as she ground the wolfsbane petals. Each purple fragment released bitter oils that stung her nose, a cruel reminder of what she could never become. The mortar felt heavy in her hands, too heavy for such simple work. "Still playing with your weeds?" The voice cut through the peaceful silence of her apothecary hut like a blade through silk. She didn't look up, couldn't. Because if she met Garrett's eyes right now, he'd see the fury burning there. The same fury that had been building for 23 years of his casual cruelty. "These weeds," she said, her voice steady as stone, "saved your mother's life last winter." Garrett stepped closer. His boots scraped against the wooden floor, a sound that always made her skin crawl. "My mother wouldn't have needed saving if you hadn't cursed our bloodline." There it was, the accusation that followed her everywhere. Arya's grandmother had been the last true healer in their pack, the woman who could speak to the old magic, the woman who'd died protecting a secret that had somehow passed to Arya, making her the weakest wolf who'd ever lived. "I didn't choose this," she whispered. "No, but you'll pay for it all the same." Garrett's smile was all teeth and malice. "Uncle's calling a pack meeting tonight. Something about the Lycan King's patience." Ice filled Arya's veins. She'd heard whispers, rumors of an ancient debt, a blood price that had been hanging over their pack for generations, like a sword waiting to fall. "What does that have to do with me?" "Everything." Garrett leaned against her work table, deliberately knocking over a jar of dried herbs. The contents scattered across the floor like broken promises. "See, Uncle's been thinking. About tribute. About what might satisfy a king who's known for his appetites." The mortar slipped from Arya's hands. It crashed to the floor, sending wolfsbane everywhere. Purple petals mixed with brown earth, beautiful and deadly. "You wouldn't dare." "Wouldn't I?" Garrett's eyes gleamed. "A cursed omega, a shameful reminder of our past failures, seems like the perfect offering to me." Arya's heart hammered against her ribs. Each beat echoed in her ears like drums of war. She thought of her hidden knives, the ones her grandmother had taught her to use in secret, the ones that could slide between ribs as easily as they could slice herbs. But killing Garrett wouldn't solve anything. It would only prove what they all believed, that she was dangerous, uncontrollable. Instead, she lifted her chin, met his gaze with steel in her own. "If Uncle wants to offer me as tribute," she said, voice cutting through the tension like her hidden blades, "he'll have to catch me first." Garrett's smile faltered. Just for a moment, but long enough for Arya to see the flicker of uncertainty in his eyes. Good. Let him wonder. Let them all wonder what the cursed Omega might be capable of when cornered. Because tonight, at that pack meeting, Arya suspected she was about to find out exactly how much fight she had left in her. The sun was setting, shadows grew longer, and somewhere in the distance she could swear she heard the howl of something ancient and hungry stirring to life. Chapter 2: The Price of Shame. The pack meeting felt like a trial. Arya stood at the very edge of the gathering, pressed against the cold stone wall of the ceremonial hall. Every face turned toward the center where her Uncle Marcus commanded attention, like the alpha he'd never truly been. His voice boomed through the space. The debt must be paid. Whispers rippled through the crowd. Fear thick as smoke in the air. Arya watched mothers pull their children closer, saw fathers exchange worried glances, but no one looked at her, not yet. For 3 generations, Marcus continued, his scarred hands gripping the podium, our pack has owed King Dravane's bloodline, a debt sealed in blood, a debt that grows heavier each day we delay. Arya's breath came shallow. She knew this story. Her grandmother had whispered it to her during long winter nights. How their great-grandfather had broken ancient laws. How he'd stolen from the Lycan king's treasury to save their dying packlands. How that theft had bound their bloodline to servitude. The king grows impatient, Marcus said. His eyes swept the crowd like a predator searching for prey. His envoys have made it clear, we pay now or we all pay later. What does he want? Someone called out. Marcus smiled. The expression looked wrong on his weathered face, too sharp, too cold. A tribute, a life offered willingly to his service. The hall erupted, voices raised in panic and protest. Who would they choose? How could they decide? What if the king wasn't satisfied? Arya felt the walls closing in. The noise pressed against her ears until she could barely think, until she could barely breathe. Then Marcus raised his hand. Silence fell like a blade. Fortunately, he said, the choice has been made for us. That's when the eyes found her. One by one, heads turned. Gazes locked onto her position by the wall. Understanding dawned on face after face until the entire pack was staring at her with a mixture of relief and pity. Arya Sinclair. Marcus spoke her name like a curse. Cursed blood. Weak wolf. A burden we've carried too long. Her legs wanted to buckle. Her heart wanted to stop. But Arya forced herself to stand straight, to meet her uncle's gaze without flinching. She cannot shift properly, Marcus continued. Cannot produce strong offspring, cannot contribute to our pack's strength, but perhaps she can serve one final purpose. You bastard! The words slipped out before she could stop them. Marcus's eyes flashed. Careful, niece, you forget your place. My place? Arya stepped forward, away from the wall, into the light where everyone could see her clearly. My place is healing your people, protecting your children. I've spent my entire life serving this pack despite how you've treated me. And now you'll serve in a different way. Marcus's voice carried the weight of absolute authority. You'll go to King Dravane. You'll represent our pack's commitment to honoring old debts. The crowd murmured approval. Of course they did. Better her than their own children. Better the cursed Omega than someone who mattered. Arya's hands clenched at her sides. And if I refuse? Then you'll be cast out, packless, alone. Marcus leaned forward. At least this way, your sacrifice means something. Sacrifice. The word hung in the air like a death sentence. But as Arya looked around the hall, at these wolves who'd never accepted her, never valued her, never seen her as anything more than a burden, something cold and hard settled in her chest. Fine. They wanted to send her to the Lycan king. They wanted to use her as payment for their ancestors' crimes. Let them. Because they had no idea what they were unleashing. They thought they were sending a weak, broken thing to appease a monster. They were wrong. Arya lifted her chin, met her uncle's eyes with a smile that held no warmth. I accept. Chapter 3. Into the Wolf's Den. The iron shackles felt heavier than they should. Arya tested them carefully as the transport carriage rolled through the mountain passes toward the Lycan king's territory. Heavy, yes, but not impossible to slip if she dislocated her thumb. Her grandmother's voice echoed in her memory. Small hands are a gift, little wolf. They can reach places others cannot. They can escape what others cannot. The 2 guards sitting across from her looked bored. Elite Lycan soldiers, their uniforms crisp and weapons well-maintained. They'd barely spoken since collecting her at the pack borders 3 hours ago. How much farther? She asked. The older guard, gray at his temples, scar across his jaw, glanced up from sharpening his knife. Few more hours, You in a hurry to meet your fate? Just curious about my new home. He laughed, a sound like grinding stone. Home? Girl, your tribute. You're not going to a home, you're going to a king who collects debts in blood. Arya let her expression remain calm, unthreatened. Inside, her pulse quickened, not from fear, but from anticipation. Finally she'd be somewhere her uncle's influence couldn't reach, somewhere she might find answers about her grandmother's secrets. The carriage hit a rough patch of road. Arya's bag shifted, and she heard the soft clink of glass vials hidden in its false bottom, herbs that could heal, poisons that could kill, tools her grandmother had taught her to prepare in secret. What's in the bag? The younger guard asked. Healing supplies, personal belongings. She shrugged. I'm an apothecary. Old habits. King might have use for that, the scarred guard said. His court sees plenty of injuries. The way he said it made ice form in Arya's stomach, but she kept her voice steady. I live to serve. As they climbed higher into the mountains, the landscape changed. Trees grew taller, darker. The air itself felt different, charged with power that made her skin prickle. This was old magic, ancient territory where the strongest alphas had ruled for centuries. Through the carriage window, she caught her first glimpse of the Lycan King's stronghold. Castle Shadow Peak rose from the mountainside like it had grown there. Black stone walls, towers that pierced the clouds, and everywhere, the smell of power and predators. Impressive, isn't it? The older guard followed her gaze. King Dravane's ancestors built it to last, to intimidate, to remind everyone who rules these lands. And King Dravane himself? Arya asked. What's he like? Both guards exchanged glances. The younger one shifted uncomfortably. Depends who you ask, the scarred guard said finally. Some call him just, others call him ruthless, all call him dangerous. He's never taken a mate, the younger guard added, then immediately looked like he regretted speaking. Why not? Not your concern, the older guard snapped. Your job is to serve however he commands. Nothing more. The carriage rolled through massive gates. Arya pressed her face to the window, drinking in every detail. Guard positions, wall heights, escape routes. Her grandmother had taught her to always have a way out. But as they drew closer to the main castle, something strange happened. The air grew thicker, heavier, like the moment before a storm breaks, and underneath the sense of stone and steel and hundreds of wolves, Arya caught something else. Something that made her breath catch in her throat. A scent like winter nights and dangerous promises. Like power barely contained. Like, "We're here," the scarred guard announced. The carriage stopped. Through the window, Arya saw a courtyard filled with more soldiers than she'd ever seen in one place. All of them watched the carriage with interest. All of them wondering what tribute had been brought to their king. The door opened. Cool mountain air rushed in, carrying that strange scent stronger than before. The guard gestured for her to step out. Remember, he said as she moved toward the door, show respect. Keep your eyes down. The king doesn't tolerate defiance. Arya nodded, but as her feet touched the ground and she looked up at the castle looming above her, she made a silent promise. She'd survived 23 years of her pack's hatred. She'd endured their cruel rejection and their casual dismissal. She'd been trained by a grandmother who'd known secrets that could shake the foundations of their world. Whatever this Lycan king expected from his tribute, she'd give him something he'd never forget. The wind picked up, carrying that intoxicating scent again. Somewhere in those dark halls, King Dravane was waiting. Let him wait a little longer. Arya Sinclair was coming. Chapter 4. The Moment of Truth. Following her arrival at Castle Shadow Peak, Arya's heart hammered against her ribs as heavy doors groaned open. The throne room stretched before her like a cavern carved from midnight itself. Black marble floors polished to mirror perfection, towering columns that disappeared into shadows above, and torches that cast dancing flames across walls lined with ancient weapons. But none of that mattered. Because at the far end of the room, on a throne that looked like it had been hewn from a single block of obsidian, sat the most magnificent and terrifying man she'd ever seen, King Dravane. He was massive. Even seated, his presence filled the space like a storm about to break. Broad shoulders strained against a black leather jacket. Dark hair fell across his forehead in waves that begged for fingers to run through them. And his eyes. God, his eyes. Golden, predatory, fixed on her with an intensity that made her feel stripped bare despite her clothes. "Come forward," he commanded. His voice rolled through the chamber like distant thunder, deep, rich, dangerous. Arya forced her feet to move. Each step echoed in the vast space. With every stride closer, that strange scent grew stronger. Winter nights and barely leashed power, and something else that made her wolf stir restlessly inside her chest. What is happening to me? The guards flanking his throne watched her approach with interest. She caught whispers from the shadows where other pack members lurked. Small thing, isn't she? Pretty enough, I suppose. Wonder how long she'll last. Arya lifted her chin higher. Let them underestimate her. Let them all think she was just another weak offering. 20 feet from the throne, she stopped. The silence stretched between them like a taut wire ready to snap. "You're the tribute," Dravane said. "Not a question." "I am." "Look at me when you speak." Arya's jaw clenched. She'd been staring at his boots, leather so fine it probably cost more than her pack spent on food in a month. Slowly, deliberately, she raised her gaze. The moment their eyes met, something electric shot through her. Recognition, hunger, a pull so strong it stole her breath. Dravane went completely still. His nostrils flared slightly, and she saw his knuckles go white where they gripped the throne's armrests. "What's your name?" His voice had gone rougher. "Arya Sinclair." "And why did your pack send you to me, Arya Sinclair?" The way he said her name made heat pool low in her belly. Focus. This wasn't the time for whatever madness was happening to her body. "Because I'm cursed," she said simply. "Because I can't shift properly. Because they think I'm worthless." A muscle in his jaw ticked. "And what do you think?" The question caught her off guard. When was the last time anyone had asked what she thought about anything? "I think," she said carefully, "that worth isn't determined by what others expect you to be." Something shifted in his expression. Interest? Approval? Before she could analyze it, he stood. Dear God, he was huge, 6.5 feet of pure muscle and predatory grace. As he stepped down from the throne, Arya fought the urge to retreat. He moved closer, closer, until only a few feet separated them. "You smell..." He paused, his head tilting slightly. "Different. Different." There was that word again, the one that had haunted her entire life. "I know." She kept her voice steady. "I'm sorry if..." "Don't apologize." The sharpness in his tone made her blink. Different isn't a flaw. He began to circle her, slowly, like a predator studying prey. But there was something else in his movement, something almost reverent. "Your pack was foolish to send you," he murmured as he completed the circle and faced her again. "Because I'm not worth the debt?" "Because they had no idea what they were giving away." The words hit her like a physical blow. Not cruel, the opposite. There was something almost protective in his tone that made her chest tight with emotions she couldn't name. Before she could respond, a commotion erupted from the back of the throne room. Guards straightening, weapons being drawn. "My lord!" A man in armor rushed forward. "We've received word. Armed riders approaching the eastern gates. They bear the crest of..." "Valyrias," Dravane finished, his voice turning to ice. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Every wolf present shifted restlessly, responding to their king's sudden menace. "How many?" Dravane demanded. 50, maybe more." Dravane's gaze flicked back to Arya. Something passed across his features, calculation, protectiveness, and beneath it all, a possessiveness that made her pulse race. "Take her to the East Wing," he ordered. "Guard her well." "Wait!" Arya started forward. "What's happening? Who is Valyrias?" But Dravane was already moving, striding toward the doors with the lethal grace of a wolf heading into battle. He paused only long enough to look back at her over his shoulder. "Someone who would very much like to get his hands on you."
Chapter 5. Recognition and danger building on the immediate tension from Valyrias' arrival. Dravane's wolf clawed at his chest as he watched Arya being escorted away. Every instinct screamed at him to follow, to protect, to claim what was his. Because that's what she was, wasn't it? His mate. The one he'd stopped believing existed. The scent that had hit him like lightning, honey and wildfire and pure female power. It was unmistakable, irreversible, mine. The word pounded through his blood like a war drum. "My lord?" Captain Kale appeared at his side. "Your orders?" Dravane forced his attention back to the immediate threat. Valyrias hadn't come here by accident. The timing was too convenient, arriving mere hours after Arya's delivery. "Double the guard on the East Wing," he commanded. "No one goes near her without my permission." "Sir? Is she really just tribute?" Dravane's golden eyes fixed on his captain with enough menace to make a lesser wolf submit. "She's under my protection. That's all you need to know." But even as he said it, his mind raced. How had Valyrias learned about Arya so quickly? The man had spies everywhere, but this felt different, personal. "What aren't you telling me, little mate?" Because there was more to Arya Sinclair than met the eye. He'd sensed it the moment she'd lifted that stubborn chin and met his gaze without flinching. Tribute didn't look at kings like that. Broken wolves didn't carry themselves with such quiet strength. And they certainly didn't smell like power barely contained. "Bring me everything we have on the Sinclair pack," he ordered as they strode through the corridors. "Going back 3 generations. Sir? Something doesn't add up. Her pack claims she's worthless, yet they send her as tribute for a debt that old. Why? Because desperate alphas didn't give away their most valuable assets. They hoarded them, protected them, unless they didn't realize what they had. The East Wing was a fortress within a fortress. Arya would be safe there while he dealt with Valyrias. But as Dravane approached the main gates where his enemy waited, he couldn't shake the feeling that this was all connected somehow. "Lord Valyrias," he called as he emerged into the courtyard. "To what do I owe this unexpected visit?" Valyrias sat astride a massive black destrier, his pale hair gleaming in the torchlight. 50 armed riders flanked him, a show of force that bordered on declaration of war. Dravane. Valyrias' smile was all teeth and no warmth. "I hear congratulations are in order. New tribute, I'm told." How did he know that? "News travels fast," Dravane replied carefully. "Indeed, especially when it concerns such interesting bloodlines." There it was. The confirmation that this wasn't random. Somehow, Valyrias knew exactly who Arya was. The question was why he cared. "State your business, Valyrias. It's late, and I have little patience for games." "No games." Valyrias leaned forward in his saddle. "I've come to make an offer. For the girl." Every muscle in Dravane's body went rigid. His wolf surged forward, barely contained beneath his skin. The scent of his sudden rage filled the courtyard. Pine and winter storms and barely leashed violence. "She's not for sale." "Everything is for sale, old friend. The question is price." Valyrias' pale eyes glittered. "I'll give you twice what her pack owed in debt. Triple even." "Why?" Dravane stepped forward and 50 weapons shifted in response. "What's so special about one cursed Omega that you'd ride through the night to claim her?" Who says she's cursed? Valyrias's smile widened. Perhaps her pack simply didn't understand what they possessed. The words hit like ice water, because they echoed Dravane's own thoughts too closely for comfort. You know something, he said. I know many things. I know her grandmother was Sarah Sinclair, the last true healer in the Northern Territories. I know bloodlines like that don't simply die out. Valyrias paused, letting the implications sink in. And I know that girl upstairs is worth far more than any debt. Dravane's mind raced. A healer's bloodline. That would explain the unusual scent, the sense of power he'd detected, but it also made Arya infinitely more valuable and infinitely more dangerous. My answer remains no. Even if keeping her means war between our packs? The threat hung in the air like smoke from a funeral pyre. Around the courtyard, Dravane's wolves shifted restlessly, hands drifting to weapons. Are you threatening me, Valyrias? I'm stating facts. That girl belongs with me. One way or another, I'll have her. Dravane's control snapped. One moment he was standing 10 feet away. The next, his hand was wrapped around Valyrias's throat as the other man's horse reared in panic. Touch her, he growled, his wolf bleeding through his voice, and I'll tear your throat out. 50 weapons cleared their sheaths. 50 wolves prepared to die for their lord's conflict. But Valyrias just smiled, even with crushing fingers around his windpipe. There it is, he wheezed. The truth finally comes out. She's not tribute at all, is she? She's your mate. Dravane released him with a snarl. Around them, the tension had reached a breaking point. Get off my land, he commanded, before I forget we were once allies. Valyrias straightened his shirt, still smiling. This isn't over, Dravane. That girl carries secrets that could change everything. And when I find out what they are... He didn't finish the threat. He didn't need to. As the riders disappeared into the night, Dravane stood in his courtyard and realized everything had just changed. Arya wasn't just his mate. She was the key to something bigger. Something that had drawn Valyrias out of hiding after years of careful maneuvering. What secrets are you carrying, little wolf? And how much danger have you brought to my door?
Chapter 6. Sanctuary and Revelations. Meanwhile, in the East Wing's luxurious prison, Arya paced the length of her new quarters like a caged wolf. The rooms were magnificent. Silk hangings in deep burgundy, a 4-poster bed that could sleep 6, windows that overlooked gardens she couldn't reach. Beautiful, comfortable, and utterly confining. The sound of raised voices drifted up from the courtyard below. She pressed herself against the tall windows, straining to see what was happening. Torchlight revealed mounted figures in the main yard, weapons glinting in the darkness. Who is Valyrias? And why does his name make everyone look like they've seen death itself? You shouldn't be at the window. Arya spun around. A man stood in her doorway. Tall, lean, with sandy hair and kind eyes that held too much knowledge for someone who looked barely 30. Who are you? Captain Kale. Well, I suppose I'm your guard. He stepped into the room, keeping his distance. The king wants you away from the windows until our visitors leave. Visitors who came in the middle of the night with 50 armed riders? Kale's mouth quirked up at one corner. You're observant. I'm not stupid. Arya moved away from the window but kept her eyes on him. This Valyrias, he's dangerous. Very. Kyle settled into a chair near the door, close enough to protect her, but far enough to avoid seeming threatening. He's what you might call, an ambitious rival. Rival for what? Power, territory, resources. Kyle paused, studying her face. Perhaps other things as well. There was something in his tone that made her skin prickle with unease. Such as? Before Kale could answer, footsteps echoed in the corridor. Heavy, familiar. Arya's pulse quickened as King Dravane appeared in the doorway. He looked different, wilder. His dark hair was disheveled, his golden eyes held a predatory gleam, and the scent of barely controlled violence clung to him like cologne. "Leave us," he commanded Kale. "Sir, protocol dictates. Leave us." The captain wisely chose not to argue. With a slight bow, he melted back into the corridor, closing the door behind him. Suddenly, the spacious room felt impossibly small. Dravane's presence filled every corner, made the air itself feel thick and charged. "Are you hurt?" His eyes swept over her, checking for injuries she didn't have. "No, I'm fine." She wrapped her arms around herself, trying to ignore the way his concern made warmth bloom in her chest. "What happened down there?" "Someone who wants something that belongs to me." The possessive edge in his voice made her pulse skip. "I don't belong to anyone." "Don't you?" He stepped closer, and that intoxicating scent, winter nights and barely leashed power, wrapped around her like silk. "Then why does my wolf recognize you? Why does everything in me scream mine when I look at you?" Arya's breath caught. "I don't know what you mean." "Yes, you do." Another step closer. "You felt it too, didn't you? The moment our eyes met in the throne room. Recognition, hunger. Something you've never experienced before." "Yes." The word echoed in her mind, but she couldn't bring herself to say it aloud, because admitting it would change everything, make this real in a way that terrified her. "Your pack lied to you," Dravane continued, his voice gentling. "You're not cursed, Arya. You're extraordinary." "How can you say that? You don't even know me." "I know enough." He reached up, and she thought he might touch her face. Instead, his hand fell back to his side. "I know you're stronger than they gave you credit for. I know there's power in your bloodline that they either couldn't recognize or chose to ignore, and I know that Valyrias wants you badly enough to risk war to get you." The words hit her like physical blows. "That's impossible. I'm nothing special. I can barely shift. I have no pack status. Your grandmother was Sarah Sinclair." Arya's world tilted. "How do you know that?" "Because Sarah Sinclair was legendary. The last true healer in the Northern Territories. Her bloodline was said to carry gifts that hadn't been seen in centuries." His golden eyes burned into hers. "Gifts that might have skipped a generation. Until now." "No." Arya shook her head, backing away from him. "No, that's not possible. If I had any special gifts, don't you think they would have shown up by now?" "Maybe they did. Maybe your pack was too blind to see them." Memories flooded back. Her grandmother's secretive teachings, the way plants seemed to respond to her touch, how injured animals always seemed to find their way to her door, how she'd always known things she shouldn't know. "This is insane," she whispered. "Is it?" Dravane moved closer again, and this time she didn't retreat. "Tell me, Arya, have you ever had dreams that came true? Ever known things about people you'd never met? Ever felt like you could sense things others couldn't?" "Yes." "God, yes, all of it." But before she could answer, a new scent drifted through the room, something sharp and medicinal that made her nose wrinkle. "What is that?" Dravane's expression darkened. "Wolfsbane. Someone's burning wolfsbane in the gardens." "That's impossible. Wolfsbane doesn't burn cleanly. It would just smolder and—" She stopped, realizing what she'd just revealed. "How do you know that?" His voice was deadly quiet. Arya's mouth went dry, because the truth was she did know, just like she knew which herbs could heal and which could kill, just like she knew how to move silently through forests and how to read the intentions in people's eyes, just like she'd always known she was different, even if her pack had convinced her it was a curse. "My grandmother taught me," she said finally. "What else did she teach you?" Before Arya could answer, the scent of wolfsbane grew stronger, more concentrated, and underneath it, something else that made her blood turn to ice. "We need to leave," she said suddenly. "Now." "What?" "That's not just wolfsbane burning. It's mixed with something else, something that weakens wolves." Her eyes met his, wide with dawning terror. "It's a trap." The moment the words left her lips, the lights went out, and in the sudden darkness, something howled in the distance. A sound of pure rage and promised violence. Valyrias hadn't left. He'd simply changed tactics, and now they were all in deadly danger. Chapter 7. First Encounters. Continuing from the chaos of Valyrias' trap, Arya's world spun into darkness as the wolfsbane smoke thickened around them. The acrid scent burned her throat, making it hard to breathe, hard to think. But something strange was happening. While Dravane staggered beside her, his powerful frame weakening from the toxic fumes, Arya felt nothing. The wolfsbane that should have dropped her to her knees like any other wolf simply passed through her lungs without effect. "How is that possible?" she whispered. "Move!" Dravane's voice came out rough, strained. He grabbed her hand, his fingers burning hot against her skin. "We have to get out of here before—" The door exploded inward. 3 figures in black masks burst through the opening, moving with deadly precision. Assassins. Their weapons gleamed silver in the dim light, silver that could kill even the strongest wolf. Arya's training kicked in without thought, her grandmother's lessons. Small hands are a gift, little wolf. She twisted away from Dravane's protective grip and pulled the hidden blade from her boot. 6 inches of steel that had been waiting for this moment her entire life. The first assassin reached for her. She ducked under his arm and drove her knife up between his ribs. He dropped with a gurgle of surprise. "Impossible," the second one hissed. "She should be down. The wolfsbane isn't working on her," Dravane finished. Despite his obvious weakness, he launched himself at the man with preternatural speed. Claws extended, eyes blazing gold. The fight was brutal, quick, vicious. When it ended, 3 bodies lay still on the marble floor. Arya stood over them, her blade dripping red, her chest heaving with adrenaline. "Are you hurt?" Dravane's voice held an edge of something she couldn't identify. Awe? Fear? No. She wiped her knife clean on one of the assassin's cloaks. "But you are." Blood seeped through his shirt where silver had found its mark. The wolfsbane in his system was slowing his healing. Something that should have closed in minutes was still bleeding freely. "I'm fine." "You're not." Arya moved toward him, her healer's instincts overriding everything else. "Sit down. Let me look at that." "Arya, sit down." Something in her tone made the king of all Lycans actually obey. He sank onto the edge of the bed, watching her with those predatory golden eyes as she examined his wounds. Her fingers traced the edges of the cuts. They were clean, deep, but not fatal. The silver had done its damage, but with the right treatment. "I need my bag," she said. "The herbs I brought from home." "Your bag was searched. Anything dangerous was removed." She smiled grimly. "Good thing they don't know the difference between dangerous and healing, then." 20 minutes later, Dravane's wounds were cleaned and bandaged with poultices that would draw out the silver poison and speed his recovery. Arya worked in focused silence, her hands steady despite the violence they'd just survived. "How?" he asked quietly. "How what?" "The wolfsbane. It should have affected you. Should have dropped you immediately." His eyes burned into hers. "But you moved through it like it was nothing more than morning mist." Arya's hands stilled on the bandages. Because honestly, she didn't know. All she knew was that while every other wolf in the castle had been weakened by the toxic smoke, she'd felt normal. "I don't know," she admitted. "Your grandmother never mentioned anything? Never explained why you might be different?" Different. There was that word again. But this time it didn't sound like a curse. "She said I was special, that my bloodline carried gifts that others couldn't understand." Arya's voice dropped to a whisper. "I thought she meant the healing, the way I could sense what plants would help and which would harm. What if it's more than that? Dravane caught her hand in his, stopping her nervous fidgeting with the medical supplies. What if you're immune to things that affect other wolves? The implications hit her like a physical blow. If she was immune to wolfsbane, what else might not affect her? What other weaknesses of their kind might pass right through her? That's impossible. Is it? His thumb traced across her knuckles, sending little sparks of electricity up her arm. You just fought off 3 trained assassins without breaking a sweat. You moved through poison that should have killed you. A soft knock interrupted him. My lord? Kale's voice came through the door. Are you injured? We heard the commotion. Enter, Dravane called. Kale stepped into the room, took one look at the bodies on the floor, and his expression hardened into something lethal. Valyrias, his calling card. Dravane struggled to his feet, ignoring Arya's protest. How many more made it inside? None. These 3 came over the east wall while the guards were dealing with the wolfsbane fires. They knew exactly where to find her. Her, not him. They'd come specifically for Arya. Why? She asked. Why am I so important to him? Kale and Dravane exchanged a look loaded with meaning she couldn't decipher. Because, Dravane said finally, if our suspicions are correct, you're not just immune to wolfsbane. You might be immune to all the old magics, the spells and curses that have bound our kind for centuries. Which would make you, Kale added grimly, the most dangerous weapon, or the most valuable prize, in the supernatural world. Arya sank into the nearest chair as the full weight of their words hit her. She wasn't just a cursed Omega, after all. She wasn't even just a healer. She was something else entirely. Something that powerful alphas would kill to possess, or kill to prevent others from having. And she was trapped in a castle with a man who could either protect her or destroy her, depending on which choice served his interests best.
Chapter 8. The Protector's Dilemma. In the aftermath of the failed assassination, Dravane watched Arya process the truth about her nature, and every protective instinct he possessed roared to life. She sat in that chair looking small and overwhelmed, but he'd seen her fight. Seen her move with deadly grace through poison that should have killed her. Mine. The word pounded through his blood like a war drum. But claiming her, truly claiming her, would paint a target on her back that would never fade. Every alpha with ambition would come for her. Every rival would see her as the key to ultimate power. We need to move her to the inner keep, Kale said quietly. If Valyrias knows what she is, he'll be back. Dravane finished the thought. With more men, more poison, more creative ways to get to her. I'm sitting right here, Arya said tartly. Stop talking about me like I'm not in the room. Despite everything, Dravane found himself fighting a smile. Even discovering she might be the most powerful wolf alive hadn't dampened her spirit. You're right. What do you want to do? The question seemed to surprise her. When was the last time someone had asked for her opinion on anything important? I want to understand what's happening to me, she said. These abilities. If they're real, I need to know how they work. What else I might be capable of. That's dangerous. Everything about this situation is dangerous. She stood, and there was steel in her spine that made his wolf purr with approval. Hiding won't change what I am. It'll just make me an easier target. She was right, and she was magnificent. There are ways to test your immunities, he said carefully. Old rituals, ancient magics that we could try in controlled circumstances. What kind of rituals? Dravane hesitated, because the truth was, if she truly carried the bloodline he suspected, the tests would be intimate, personal. They would require a level of trust and connection that went far beyond simple protection. The old magic responds to bonding, he said finally, to the connection between mates. Heat flared in her eyes. Quick, undeniable. We're not mates, aren't we? He stepped closer, drawn by that pull that had been driving him crazy since the moment she'd walked into his throne room. Can you honestly tell me you don't feel it? The recognition, the hunger? Her breath caught. I feel something. So do I. He was close enough now to see the rapid pulse at her throat, to smell that intoxicating scent of honey and wildfire that belonged to her alone. My wolf recognized you the instant you entered my territory. Every instinct I possess is screaming at me to claim you, protect you, make you mine in every way that matters. Because of what I might be able to do for you. The words hit like a slap. Dravane stepped back, realization hitting him like cold water. She thought he wanted her for her power, for what she could offer his pack, his territory, his political position. Is that what you think? His voice came out rougher than he intended. That I'm trying to use you? I think, she said carefully, that powerful men take what serves their interests. Like her uncle. Like her pack. Like every alpha who'd ever looked at her and seen only what they could gain. You're wrong. The words came out with such conviction that she blinked in surprise. I want you, Arya. Not your power. Not your bloodline. Not what you can do for my pack. He cupped her face in his hands, forcing her to meet his eyes. You. The woman who stands up to men twice her size. Who tends wounds while assassins lie dead at her feet. Who carries herself like a queen even when everyone around her calls her worthless. Her lips parted in surprise. For a moment, the walls she kept around herself cracked just enough for him to see the vulnerability underneath. I don't know how to trust that, she whispered. Then let me prove it. Before she could ask how, another knock echoed through the room. This time it was urgent. Desperate. My lord! A young guard burst in without waiting for permission. Forgive the intrusion, but there's been a development. We captured one of Valyrias' men trying to escape over the south wall. And? He's talking, sir. Says Valyrias has been planning this for months. Says there's something about the lady's bloodline that goes back generations. Something about a prophecy. Dravane's blood went cold. Prophecies meant ancient magic, old curses, powers that could reshape the supernatural world. What prophecy? The guard swallowed hard. The bloodline of the White Wolf, sir. The one who can break the bindings that hold our kind. Impossible. That prophecy was legend. Myth. Something told around fires to frighten children. But as he looked at Arya, at the woman who walked through Wolfsbane like it was perfume, who fought with deadly skill, who made his wolf sing with recognition, impossible suddenly seemed inevitable. Get me everything we have on the White Wolf prophecy, he commanded. Every text, every reference, every scrap of information in our archives. Sir, yes, sir. As the guard rushed away, Dravane turned back to find Arya watching him with an expression he couldn't read. The White Wolf, she said quietly. My grandmother used to tell me stories about her when I was little. What kind of stories? The kind where a cursed wolf saves everyone and pays the ultimate price for it.
Chapter 9. Revelations and Desires. Later that evening, surrounded by ancient texts and scrolls that smelled of dust and old magic, Arya learned the truth about the bedtime stories her grandmother had whispered in the dark. They weren't stories at all. They were prophecies, and she was living in one. Listen to this, Dravane said, reading from a leather-bound tome that looked older than the castle itself. When the White Wolf walks among us, she shall carry the power to break the ancient bindings. What was done in darkness shall be undone in light. What bindings? Arya asked, though part of her already knew. Could feel the answer humming in her bones like a half-remembered song. The magic that limits our kind. Kale looked up from his own research. The spells that prevent us from shifting during certain moon phases. The curses that make us vulnerable to silver and wolfsbane. The bonds that tie us to specific territories. You're saying I could undo all of that? The prophecy suggests it's possible. Dravane's golden eyes were intense as they fixed on her face. But prophecies always come with a price. Arya didn't need to ask what that price might be. She'd heard enough of her grandmother's stories to know how these things ended. The hero saves everyone and dies in the process. There's more, Cale said quietly. He held up another scroll. This one so old, the parchment was nearly transparent. This one talks about the White Wolf's mate, says he'll be the key to unlocking her power. Heat flooded Arya's cheeks. Her mate? The one whose wolf calls to hers, Dravane read. In their bonding shall the old magic find new purpose. The air in the room seemed to thicken. Arya found herself hyper-aware of Dravane's presence. The way he moved with predatory grace, the scent of winter nights and barely leashed power that clung to his skin, the way his eyes tracked her every movement like she was the most fascinating thing in his world. It doesn't mean anything, she said quickly. Just because some ancient wolf wrote down his fantasies doesn't mean... Doesn't it? Dravane stood and moved toward her with that fluid motion that made her pulse skip. Can you honestly tell me you don't feel the connection between us? The pull that gets stronger every moment we're together? She couldn't. Because she did feel it. A thrumming awareness that made her skin sensitive, and her wolf restless. Being near him was like standing too close to a fire, knowing she should step away but craving the heat anyway. I feel something, she admitted. But that doesn't mean we're destined or fated or whatever this prophecy claims. Then prove it. The challenge in his voice made her chin lift automatically. How? Kiss me. The words hung in the air between them like a dare. Arya's heart hammered against her ribs as she stared up at him, this powerful, dangerous man who could crush her without effort, but looked at her like she held the key to his survival. Why? Because if there's nothing between us, it'll just be a kiss. His voice dropped to that rough whisper that made her skin prickle with awareness. But if the prophecy is right, if we really are mates, what then? Then everything changes. She should say no, should keep the walls firmly in place between them, should remember that powerful men always wanted something, and what they wanted from her might destroy her. But as she looked into those golden eyes, eyes that held heat and hunger and something that looked dangerously like reverence, she couldn't bring herself to care about should. One kiss, she said. One kiss. He stepped closer, close enough that she had to tilt her head back to meet his gaze, close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from his skin, close enough that when he lifted his hand to cup her cheek, she could smell the wild, intoxicating scent that belonged to him alone. Last chance to run, he murmured. Instead of running, she rose on her toes and pressed her lips to his. The world exploded. Heat rushed through her veins like liquid fire. Power crackled in the air around them, making the ancient texts flutter on their tables, and underneath it all something clicked into place, like a lock finding its key, like two halves of a whole finally coming together. Mate. The word echoed through her mind with absolute certainty. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Arya knew with devastating clarity that nothing would ever be the same. Well, Dravane said, his voice rougher than she'd ever heard it. That settles that. Before she could respond, the lights in the room began to glow brighter. The ancient texts on the tables started to shimmer with golden energy, and somewhere in the distance, she could swear she heard wolves howling in harmony, a sound of recognition and welcome that seemed to come from the very foundations of the castle. What's happening? She whispered. The binding, Cale breathed from across the room. His eyes were wide with awe and something that looked like fear. It's already starting. The mate bond is awakening her power. As if to confirm his words, One of the ancient scrolls burst into flames, but instead of burning, it reformed into words of gold fire that hung in the air. The white wolf has found her shadow. Let the old magic tremble, for change comes on silver wings. Arya stared at the fiery words and realized she'd just stepped fully into a destiny she'd never asked for, one that would either save their world or destroy it. And the man beside her, this Alpha King who'd just kissed her like she was his salvation, would either be her greatest strength or her ultimate weakness. Either way, there was no going back now. Chapter 10. Useful Gifts. Following the explosive revelation of the mate bond and her awakening powers, Arya found herself in Dravane's private study 3 days later, a room that smelled of leather, old books, and the wild, intoxicating scent that belonged to him alone. She was grinding moonflower petals into powder when he entered, his presence filling the space like a storm about to break. "You've been avoiding me," he said. "I've been working." She didn't look up from her mortar and pestle, though every nerve ending in her body screamed awareness of his proximity. Captain Thorne needed something for his infected wound. The silver poisoning wasn't responding to normal treatments. And now? Now he'll be back to full strength by tomorrow. She finally raised her eyes to meet his gaze. Because, unlike regular healing herbs, mine seemed to work differently now. Ever since their kiss, since the mate bond had snapped into place with the force of a lightning strike, her healing abilities had evolved. Plants responded to her touch like never before. Wounded wolves healed faster under her care. And most disturbing of all, she could sense things she shouldn't be able to sense, like the fact that Dravane hadn't slept properly in 3 days because he was fighting the pull between them. "We need to talk about what happened," he said. "Do we?" Arya set down her tools and faced him fully. "Because I think we both know what happened. The prophecy is real. The mate bond is real. And now everyone in this castle is watching us like we're about to either save the world or destroy it." "Is that what you think? That you're going to destroy the world?" The raw vulnerability in his voice made her chest tighten. Because honestly, she was terrified. The power thrumming through her veins felt wild, unpredictable, like trying to hold lightning in her bare hands. "I think," she said carefully, "that power without understanding is dangerous. And I understand very little about what's happening to me." Dravane stepped closer, close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from his skin, close enough that when he spoke, his breath brushed against her ear. "Then let me help you understand." Before she could ask what he meant, he picked up one of her prepared herb bundles, a mixture that should have been harmless to any wolf. "What are you—" He crushed the bundle in his fist. Immediately, the scent of bitter almonds filled the air. Wolfsbane, hidden in her supposedly harmless healing mixture. "Someone," he said grimly, "has been sabotaging your supplies." Ice filled Arya's veins. "That's impossible. I prepared these myself. I would have known—" "Would you?" His golden eyes fixed on hers with laser intensity. "Or have you been so focused on your new abilities that you missed someone tampering with your work?" The implications hit her like a physical blow. If someone had corrupted her healing supplies, if wolves had been taking medicine that was actually poison. "Captain Thorne," she whispered. "How many others have I—" "You haven't hurt anyone." Dravane's voice carried absolute conviction. "Because your immunity extends to recognizing corrupted substances. Your wolf knows the difference even when your conscious mind doesn't." "How can you be sure?" "Because I've been testing everything you've given to my people, every mixture, every poultice, every single thing that's left this room." His admission hung between them like a confession. "I had to know if you were a threat." The words should have stung, should have made her angry. Instead, she felt relieved, because it meant he was protecting his pack, being a good alpha, even if it meant not trusting her completely. "And your conclusion?" My conclusion, he said, stepping close enough that she had to tilt her head back to maintain eye contact, is that you're not just immune to poisons. You can purify them, transform them into something healing instead of harmful. That's impossible. Is it? He gestured to her workbench, where the wolfsbane-tainted herbs now glowed with a soft golden light. Look at them, Arya. Really look. She turned, and her breath caught. The bitter scent of wolfsbane was gone, replaced by something clean and sweet. The herbs that should have been deadly now pulsed with warm energy that made her wolf hum with contentment. How? Because you're the white wolf, the one who can transform darkness into light. His voice dropped to that rough whisper that made her skin prickle with awareness. The one who can take what's broken and make it whole again. Before she could respond, urgent footsteps echoed in the corridor outside. A moment later, Kyle burst through the door without knocking, something he'd never done before. My lord, forgive the intrusion, but we have a problem. His face was grim as death. We captured another spy trying to escape the grounds. This one was carrying a message. From Valyrias? No, sir, from Lady Arya's uncle, Marcus Sinclair. The name hit Arya like a physical blow. What? Cale's eyes filled with something that looked like pity. I'm sorry, my lady, but it appears your pack has been working with Lord Valyrias from the beginning. The message confirms it. They've been feeding him information about your abilities for months. The room spun around her own pack, her own blood. They hadn't just sold her to pay a debt. They'd been actively helping her enemies track her down. That's not possible, she whispered. They didn't even know about my abilities. They thought I was cursed. They knew, Dravane said quietly. Your grandmother must have told someone before she died. Someone who recognized what you were and saw an opportunity. Betrayal cut through her like a blade made of ice. All those years of being treated like a burden, a shameful reminder of their failures. It had all been a lie. They'd known exactly what she was, and they'd used that knowledge to sell her to the highest bidder. Show me the message, she said. Kale hesitated, glancing at Dravane. Show me, she repeated. And this time her voice carried an edge of power that made both men straighten involuntarily. The message was brief, brutal, and utterly damning. The girl's abilities are stronger than anticipated. She can purify wolfsbane and accelerate healing beyond normal parameters. Suggest moving to final phase before her bond with Dravane becomes irreversible. Payment, as agreed. Final phase, Arya repeated numbly. What's the final phase? Based on Valyrias's previous tactics, Dravane said grimly. I'd guess he's planning to take you by force, and your uncle just gave him the information he needs to do it successfully. Arya stared at the message until the words blurred together. Her pack, her family, the wolves who'd raised her and claimed to protect her. They'd been planning her capture all along. I need air, she said suddenly. I can't breathe in here. She pushed past both men and stumbled toward the door, desperate to escape the suffocating weight of betrayal. But as she reached the threshold, Dravane's voice stopped her cold. Arya, whatever you're thinking of doing, don't do it alone. She looked back at him, this powerful, dangerous man who'd shown her more protection and care in a week than her own pack had in 23 years. Why? She asked. Why do you care what happens to me? Because, he said simply, you're mine, and I protect what's mine.
Chapter 11. The Midpoint Shift. 2 hours after the devastating revelation about her pack's betrayal, Dravane found Arya on the castle's highest balcony, a stone platform that overlooked the mountain valleys below. She stood at the edge, her dark hair whipping in the wind, looking like she might take flight at any moment. His wolf clawed at his chest. Protect, comfort, claim. Dangerous place to think, he said as he approached. Seems appropriate. Her voice was steady, but he could smell the salt of unshed tears. My whole life has been built on lies. Why not stand somewhere that reflects that? Your life isn't a lie. Isn't it? She turned to face him, and the pain in her eyes hit him like a physical blow. 23 years, Dravane. 23 years of being told I was worthless, cursed, a burden they couldn't wait to be rid of. And all along they knew. They knew what I was, and they were planning to profit from it. He wanted to touch her, to pull her into his arms and absorb some of that devastating hurt. But she held herself like glass, fragile, and likely to shatter if handled wrong. They were fools, he said instead. Blind, greedy fools who couldn't recognize the treasure they had. Or maybe they recognized it perfectly. Maybe they just saw a way to turn that treasure into something more valuable. Her laugh held no humor. My own uncle, Dravane. My own blood. Blood doesn't always mean loyalty. No, but it should mean something. She wrapped her arms around herself, and he noticed she was shivering despite the warm evening air. I keep thinking about all the times I tried to please them, all the times I worked myself to exhaustion trying to prove I belonged, and they were laughing at me the whole time. The raw pain in her voice made something violent and protective surge through him. If Marcus Sinclair were standing here right now, Dravane would tear his throat out without hesitation. Their loss, he said firmly. Their blindness. Their failure. Not yours. How can you be so sure? Because I've seen what you can do. I've watched you heal my people, fight off assassins, walk through poison that should have killed you. He stepped closer, drawn by that pull that had been driving him crazy since the moment she'd entered his territory. I've felt the power in you when you kiss me, the way the very air around us changes when we're together. Heat flared in her eyes, quick, undeniable. That doesn't mean... An explosion shattered the evening quiet. The castle shook beneath their feet as fire bloomed from the east wing, exactly where Arya's original quarters had been. Alarms began wailing throughout the stronghold as guards rushed to respond. What the hell? Dravane started. Another explosion, this one closer. The scent of smoke and something else, something chemical and wrong, filled the air. It's starting, Arya said, her voice going deadly calm. Whatever they planned, it's happening now. Before Dravane could respond, shapes dropped from the sky. Winged creatures that shouldn't exist, carrying riders in black leather and steel, an aerial assault that bypassed every ground-based defense they'd prepared. Impossible, he breathed. Flying mounts haven't been seen in centuries, Arya finished. Which means Valyrias has been planning this a lot longer than we thought. The lead rider swooped low over the balcony, close enough for Dravane to see his face. Valyrias himself, mounted on something that looked like a cross between a dragon and a nightmare. "Hello, old friend," he called, his voice carrying despite the wind and chaos. "I believe you have something that belongs to me," Dravane snarled, his wolf surging forward. "She belongs to no one but herself." "Does she?" Valyrias pulled his mount into a hovering position just out of reach. "Tell me, Arya Sinclair, did your mate mention that he's been negotiating with your uncle about your future? That there was a backup plan in place if you proved difficult?" Ice filled Dravane's veins, because there had been discussions, before he'd understood what Arya was, before the mate bond had snapped into place and changed everything. "That was before," he started. "Before what?" "Before you decided you wanted to keep the prize for yourself instead of honoring your agreements." Arya's head whipped toward him, eyes wide with shock and something that looked like betrayal. "What agreements?" "Nothing that matters now." "Everything that matters now." Valyrias laughed, and the sound was like breaking glass. "Tell her, Dravane. Tell her about the contract you signed, about what you promised her uncle in exchange for his cooperation." Dravane's world tilted, because he had signed something, a standard treaty of alliance that had seemed meaningless at the time, before he'd known Arya was his mate, before everything had changed. You bastard, he snarled at Valyrias. Perhaps, but at least I'm an honest bastard. Valyrias's pale eyes fixed on Arya with predatory intensity. Your king promised to return you to your pack if you proved unsuitable as tribute. The contract is quite clear on the matter. Is that true? Arya's voice was barely a whisper. Dravane's throat closed. Because technically, yes, the contract existed, and technically, if interpreted a certain way, it could be used to justify sending her back. But that was before he'd realized what she meant to him, before the mate bond had made the thought of losing her physically painful. Arya, listen to me. Is it true? She repeated. And this time her voice carried an edge of power that made the very stones beneath their feet hum with energy. Yes, he said quietly. But... She stepped away from him. The betrayal in her eyes was worse than any physical blow he'd ever taken. But, she prompted, but everything changed the moment I met you. The moment I realized what you were to me. That contract means nothing now. Except it's legally binding, Valyrias called cheerfully. And I have witnesses to its signing, including dear Uncle Marcus. More explosions rocked the castle. Smoke poured from multiple wings now, and the sounds of battle echoed from the courtyards below. Whatever Valyrias had planned, it was happening fast and with devastating efficiency. Choose, Dravane. Valyrias continued. Honor your agreement and return what never belonged to you, or watch your castle burn while your people die defending a lie. Arya looked between them, at Valyrias hovering on his impossible mount, at Dravane standing frozen by the weight of his past decisions, at the castle burning around them while wolves screamed in the distance. No, she said quietly. No. Valyrias raised an eyebrow. No. This time her voice rang with power and absolute conviction. I don't belong to my uncle. I don't belong to you. And I sure as hell don't belong to some contract signed before anyone knew what I was capable of. The air around her began to shimmer with golden energy. The same energy that had transformed the corrupted herbs in the study. The same power that could break the ancient bindings that held their kind. I belong to myself, she continued, and her voice carried across the entire castle grounds. And I choose who I stand with. She turned to look at Dravane, and despite everything, the betrayal, the contracts, the lies, her eyes held no hatred, only determination. I choose you, she said simply. Not because of some prophecy or mate bond or political alliance, but because you're the first person who ever saw me as something more than a burden or a prize. The words hit him like salvation, like redemption, like everything he'd never dared hope for. Arya, and you, she said, turning back to Valyrias, can go to hell.
Chapter 12. Unleashing Power. In the aftermath of her declaration, Arya felt something fundamental shift inside her chest, like a dam breaking, like chains snapping, like a wolf who'd been caged her entire life finally remembering what it meant to run free. Power flooded through her veins, not the quiet, controlled energy she'd been accessing before, but something wild and primal and absolutely devastating. Impossible, Valyrias breathed, his mount backing away as golden light began to pour from her skin. The awakening shouldn't be able to happen without what? Without your permission. Arya's voice carried harmonics that made the very air vibrate. You have no idea what you're dealing with. Because she was beginning to understand. The White Wolf prophecy wasn't about some distant savior who would appear to rescue everyone. It was about a choice, a decision to stop hiding, stop being afraid, and start embracing the power that had always been there. The power her grandmother had seen. The power her pack had feared. The power that could reshape their entire world. Arya, Dravane said urgently, be careful. That much energy, that fast. I know what I'm doing. And surprisingly, she did. The power flowing through her felt natural. Right, like she'd been born to wield it. She raised her hands, and the golden energy crystallized into something visible, something that made Valyrias's impossible flying mount shriek in terror and wheel away from the balcony. "You want to know what the White Wolf can do?" she called to him. "Let me show you." She reached out with her mind, feeling for the corrupted magic that kept his creatures aloft, found it, dark, twisted spells that violated the natural order, and began to unravel them. One by one, the flying mounts began to falter. Their riders cursed and fought to maintain control as their supernatural steeds suddenly remembered they weren't supposed to be able to fly. "Stop!" Valyrias snarled. "You're interfering with forces beyond your understanding." "No," Arya said calmly. "I'm correcting a mistake." Because that's what her power was, she realized. Not destruction, not dominance, correction, healing. The ability to take what had been twisted and make it right again. The flying mounts crashed to earth one by one, their riders surviving but stranded. Valyrias himself barely managed to land his creature in the courtyard before it too lost the ability to defy gravity. "You've made a grave error," he called up to her. "This attack was just a distraction, the real threat—" His words were cut off by screams from inside the castle. Not screams of battle, but something worse. Something that made Arya's blood turn to ice. "The children," Dravane said, his face going pale. "He's after the children." Because of course he was. What better way to force compliance than to threaten the most innocent members of the pack? "Where?" Arya demanded. "The nursery wing. But it's on the other side of the castle, and with all the fires—" Arya didn't wait to hear the rest. Power sang through her veins as she closed her eyes and reached out with senses she was only beginning to understand. There. She could feel them. 15 young wolves, ages 3 to 12, huddled in a room that reeked of terror and something else. Something chemical. More wolfsbane. But this time it wasn't just a weapon. It was a trap. They were flooding the nursery with concentrated poison, knowing that any adult who tried to rescue the children would be weakened beyond the ability to fight. "They're using the children as bait," she said. "We have to—" Dravane started. "You have to stay here and coordinate the defense," Arya interrupted. "Because this attack on the nursery, it's meant to draw you away from the real target." "Which is?" She met his eyes, and the truth settled between them like a death sentence. "Me. All of this. The aerial assault, the fires, the children, it's all designed to separate us, to get me alone so they can take me without having to fight through your entire pack. Then we don't separate. We have to." She cupped his face in her hands, memorizing the sharp angles of his cheekbones, the gold fire in his eyes. "Because those children will die if someone doesn't help them, and I'm the only one who can walk through wolfsbane without being affected." "Arya, no, it's too dangerous." "Everything about this is dangerous." She rose on her toes and pressed her lips to his in a kiss that tasted of desperation and goodbye. "But those children don't deserve to pay for the choices adults have made." When she pulled away, his eyes were blazing with something that looked like panic. "Promise me," he said urgently. "Promise me you'll come back. I promise I'll try." It wasn't the answer he wanted, but it was the only honest one she could give, because she was about to walk into a trap designed specifically for her. And while her power might be able to save the children, there was no guarantee she'd survive whatever Valyrias had planned. "I love you," she said suddenly. The words spilled out before she could stop them, raw and honest and absolutely true. Something blazed in his eyes, joy and terror and a possessiveness so fierce it took her breath away. "I love you too," he said, "which is why I'm not letting you do this alone. Dravane. The pack can handle Valyrias's ground forces, but you're not walking into that trap without backup." His voice carried the absolute authority of an alpha king. "We go together, or we don't go at all." Before she could argue, another scream echoed from the nursery wing. Younger this time, more desperate. They were running out of time. Together, she agreed. But we do this my way. What's your way? Arya smiled, and for the first time since this nightmare began, it was sharp and dangerous, and absolutely feral. We don't just save the children, she said. We end this, all of it, tonight. Because she was done being hunted, done being sold and traded and treated like a prize to be won. It was time for the White Wolf to show the world exactly what she was capable of when the people she loved were threatened. Chapter 13. The investigation, moving deeper into the castle's burning corridors with Dravane at her side, Arya felt the weight of their combined purpose. Each step toward the nursery wing brought new revelations about Valyrias's twisted plan, a new understanding of her own growing power. The wolfsbane residue is getting stronger, she murmured, testing the air with senses that seemed to expand with every passing moment. But there's something else. Something wrong. Dravane's golden eyes swept the smoke-filled hallway. Wrong how? The poison isn't just meant to weaken wolves, it's designed to call to something. Arya pressed her hand against the stone wall, feeling vibrations that shouldn't exist. Like a summoning spell mixed with wolfsbane. Before he could respond, a child's scream echoed from ahead, high, terrified, and utterly heartbreaking. They broke into a run. The nursery wing doors hung open, revealing devastation beyond anything Arya had imagined. Furniture overturned, windows shattered, and in the center of the chaos, 15 children huddled together, while 3 figures in black leather circled them like predators. But these weren't ordinary wolves. Wraiths, Dravane breathed, his voice filled with horror. He's bound wraiths to do his bidding. The creatures that stalked the children moved wrong, too fluid, too ethereal, like shadows given substance. Their eyes glowed with sickly green light, and when they spoke, their voices carried the echo of the grave. The White Wolf comes, one hissed, as foretold, as planned. Give us the children, Arya called, stepping into the doorway with power crackling around her like golden lightning. And I'll consider letting you return to whatever hell spawned you. The lead wraith laughed, a sound like breaking bones. Bold words from one so young. Do you know what we are, little wolf? Dead things that should have stayed dead. We are the price of old magic, the cost of binding power that was never meant to be bound. Its gaze fixed on her with predatory hunger. And you are the key to setting us free. Understanding hit her like cold water. The prophecy isn't about breaking magical bindings on wolves. It's about breaking the barriers between life and death. Clever girl. The wraith's smile revealed teeth like broken glass. Valyrias promised us freedom if we helped him claim you. And once your power is his to command, the realm of the dead will spill into the world of the living, Dravane finished grimly, creating an army of the damned under his control. Arya felt sick. All this time, she'd thought her power was meant to help their kind. Instead, it could unleash something far worse than any curse currently binding them. But here's what your master didn't tell you, she said, stepping fully into the room. I don't just break bindings. I can strengthen them too. The wraiths recoiled as golden energy poured from her skin. Not the wild, uncontrolled power from before, but something focused, deliberate, surgical in its precision. Impossible, the lead creature snarled. The White Wolf prophecy speaks only of breaking. Maybe you're reading the wrong prophecy. Arya reached out with her mind, feeling for the dark magic that anchored these creatures to the living world. Found it, a network of twisted spells that violated every natural law. And began to sever them one by one. The wraiths shrieked as their forms started to dissolve. You cannot! We have a right! You have nothing! Arya said coldly. Death is death, and some boundaries shouldn't be crossed. Within moments, the creatures were gone, not destroyed, but returned to whatever realm they'd been pulled from. The children collapsed in relief, crying and calling for their parents. "How?" Dravane asked in amazement. "How did you know you could do that?" "Because my grandmother's stories weren't just about the white wolf breaking bad magic. They were about her knowing which magic deserved to be broken and which deserved to be preserved." Arya knelt beside the nearest child, a little girl with tear-streaked cheeks. "It's okay, sweetheart. You're safe now." But even as she comforted the children, her mind raced. If Valyrias had access to wraiths and binding spells powerful enough to summon the dead, what else was he capable of? "We need to get them out of here," Dravane said urgently. If this was just the first wave. A new scream echoed through the castle, adult this time, male, and filled with a specific kind of agony that made Arya's blood freeze. "Kale," Dravane breathed. Through their mate bond, Arya felt his surge of protective fury. Kale wasn't just his captain, he was his oldest friend, his most trusted ally, and now he was in danger. "Go," she said quietly. "I'm not leaving you. You're not leaving me. You're trusting me to handle this while you save someone who matters to both of us." She stood, power still crackling around her like armor. "I can protect the children and get them to safety, but Kyle needs you." For a moment, Dravane looked torn between duty and desire, between protecting his mate and saving his friend. "The children first," he said finally. "We evacuate them together. Then we find Kale." "Together?" "Together." His eyes blazed with golden fire. "Because whatever Valyrias has planned, whatever trap he's laying, we face it as mates, as equals, as partners." The word partners sent warmth flooding through her chest. Because that's what they were becoming, wasn't it? Not just fated mates thrown together by prophecy, but two people choosing to stand together against impossible odds. "Partners," she agreed. But as they began organizing the children for evacuation, another piece of the puzzle clicked into place. Valyrias hadn't just attacked the nursery to draw them away from the main battle. He'd done it to test her power, to see exactly what the White Wolf was capable of, which meant everything. The wraiths, the poisoned air, even Kale's capture, was part of a larger plan. A plan that required him to understand her abilities before making his final move, and now he had exactly the information he needed.
Chapter 14. The Betrayal Revealed. 10 minutes later, as they led the last of the rescued children through the castle's hidden passages toward safety, Dravane couldn't shake the feeling that they were walking into a carefully laid trap. Every instinct he possessed screamed danger. The attacks had been too coordinated, too precisely timed, too perfectly designed to separate them and test Arya's abilities. "Something's wrong," he murmured as they approached the safe room where the children would be protected by his most trusted guards. Besides the obvious, Arya kept her voice light for the children's sake, but he could smell her tension. Valyrias has never been this organized before, this strategic. Dravane's mind raced through possibilities. In the past, his attacks were brutal but simple. Direct assault, overwhelming force. This level of coordination requires inside information, Arya finished quietly. They'd reached the safe room, a reinforced chamber deep in the castle's foundations where non-combatants could shelter during attacks. The heavy door stood open, warm light spilling into the corridor. But something was wrong with the scent signature inside. Dravane stopped so suddenly that Arya nearly collided with him. "Don't go in there." "What? Why?" The answer stepped out of the safe room and Dravane's world shattered. Marcus Sinclair, Arya's uncle, the man who'd sold her to pay a debt that might not have existed. But he wasn't alone. Behind him came two figures that made Dravane's blood turn to ice. Elder Thorn, his own council member, a wolf he'd trusted for decades, and Kale, his captain, his friend, his most trusted ally. All three wore the same expression, cold satisfaction mixed with something that looked disturbingly like relief. "Hello, niece," Marcus said pleasantly. "You've caused quite a stir." Arya went rigid beside him. How are you here?" "I've been here for hours, dear, coordinating with Lord Valyrias's forces." Marcus's smile was all teeth and malice. "Did you really think this entire operation was improvised?" "You betrayed your own pack," Dravane snarled, his wolf clawing for release. "Betrayed?" Elder Thorn laughed. "We're saving them. All of them. Do you have any idea what that girl's power could do if left unchecked?" Before Dravane could respond, Kyle stepped forward, and the betrayal hit like a physical blow. "I'm sorry, my lord," his captain said quietly, "but this is bigger than personal loyalties." "How long?" Dravane's voice came out rough with pain and rage. "How long have I been working with Valyrias?" 3 years. Kyle's expression held genuine regret. "How long have I known about Lady Arya's true nature?" "Since the day she arrived." "The spy network," Arya whispered. "All those reports about Valyrias's movements, they were coordinated to make him seem like more of a threat than he actually was. While giving him perfect information about our defenses," Dravane realized. "Every strategy session, every security protocol, every detail about your growing bond with the White Wolf," Marcus finished. "Which, I must say, developed faster than we anticipated." Around them, the rescued children whimpered in fear and confusion. They were trapped in a corridor with enemies on one side and no exit behind them. "What do you want?" Arya asked, though her voice suggested she already knew. "To complete our agreement, of course." Valyrias emerged from the safe room like a shadow given substance. "You for the children, your cooperation for their lives." He gestured, and more figures appeared, armed wolves wearing Valyrias's colors. Too many to fight. Too well positioned to escape. "The original contract your king signed was quite specific about returning unsuitable tribute," Valyrias continued. "These witnesses can confirm that your difficulties with controlling your power make you unsuitable for continued residence here." "That's not," Dravane started. "Legal?" Valyrias smiled. "I'm afraid it is. Elder Thorn has been very helpful in researching the relevant laws." Dravane looked around the corridor, at the children they'd saved, at the enemies surrounding them, at Arya standing beside him with power crackling around her like contained lightning. "And if she refuses? Then the children die. Your castle burns. Your pack is declared rogue for harboring a dangerous magical anomaly." Valyrias's pale eyes glittered with triumph. "Really, the choice is quite simple." But as Dravane looked at Arya, this magnificent, powerful woman who'd walked into his life and changed everything, he realized the choice wasn't simple at all. Because there was a third option, one that none of their enemies had considered. "Arya," he said quietly, "do you trust me?" She met his eyes, and despite everything, the betrayal, the trap, the impossible odds, her gaze held absolute faith. "With my life. Then when I give the signal, run. I'm not leaving you. You're not leaving me. You're saving yourself so we can finish this together." He stepped closer, his voice dropping to a whisper only she could hear. "The mate bond works both ways. I can feel your power, and you can feel mine. Use it." Understanding dawned in her eyes. The Alpha command. "Every wolf in this corridor except Valyrias will have to obey if we combine our power." His gaze burned into hers. "Even the ones who betrayed us." "That's impossible," she breathed. "I'm not an alpha. You're the White Wolf, and you're my mate, which makes you the most powerful alpha in this room." Valyrias was still talking, laying out terms and conditions for her surrender. But Dravane was no longer listening. Instead, he was preparing to show everyone present exactly what happened when someone threatened his mate. "Ready?" he whispered. Arya's smile was sharp as a blade. "Ready." And the corridor exploded into chaos.
Chapter 15. The Alpha's Command. In the moment before Dravane gave the signal, Arya felt something fundamental shift in the mate bond between them. Not just emotional connection, actual power. His strength flowing into her, her abilities amplifying his. "Now!" he roared. The alpha command that erupted from both of them simultaneously was like nothing Arya had ever experienced. It wasn't just Dravane's voice, it was hers too, magnified and enhanced by the white wolf power coursing through her veins. "Kneel!" they commanded in perfect unison. Every wolf in the corridor, including Marcus, Elder Thorn, and Kale, dropped to their knees with bone-jarring force. The alpha command was irresistible, primal, backed by power that made the very stones beneath their feet tremble. Every wolf except Valyrias. He staggered under the pressure of their combined command but remained standing, his pale face twisted with rage and something that looked like fear. "Impossible," he snarled. "She's not even a true alpha." "Isn't she?" Dravane's voice carried lethal menace as he stepped over the kneeling forms of his former allies. "The White Wolf doesn't follow normal rules, Valyrias. She makes her own." Around them, the betrayers struggled against the compulsion holding them down. Marcus's face was purple with effort and humiliation. Elder Thorn looked like he might pass out from the strain of fighting an alpha command he couldn't resist, but Kale looked broken, defeated, like a man who'd just realized the true cost of his choices. "The children," Arya said urgently. "We need to get them out of here before I kill every wolf in this corridor." Dravane's eyes blazed with golden fire. "Don't worry, I'm not planning to leave witnesses." The cold finality in his voice made even Valyrias step back. "You can't," the pale wolf said. "They're under the protection of diplomatic immunity. The treaty was voided the moment you attacked my mate and threatened children under my protection." Dravane's canines were elongating, his wolf pushing closer to the surface. "There are no treaties, no rules, no mercy for those who betray pack bonds." Arya felt his rage through their connection, pure, incandescent fury that demanded blood and vengeance. It would be so easy to let him kill them all. They deserved it for their betrayal. "But wait," she said quietly. Dravane's head whipped toward her. "Arya, I know what you're feeling. I can feel it too." She stepped closer to him, her hand finding his arm. "But killing them won't solve the real problem." "The real problem? Why did they betray us?" She looked around at the kneeling figures, at Marcus's hatred, Elder Thorn's fear, Kale's anguish. What made them so afraid of my power that they were willing to work with someone like Valyrias? Because they're cowards. Because they don't understand. Arya's voice carried new authority, not the borrowed power of an alpha command, but something deeper, something that came from her own growing confidence. "They see the White Wolf as a threat because they don't know what I'm actually capable of." She released the alpha command with a thought, allowing the kneeling wolves to raise their heads. They remained on their knees, smart enough not to test Dravane's mercy twice, but they could speak. "Tell me," she said, addressing all of them. "What did you think would happen if my power went unchecked?" It was Elder Thorn who answered, his voice shaking. "The ancient texts speak of the White Wolf bringing about the end of our kind, destroying the natural order, unleashing chaos that would—" "Which texts?" Arya interrupted. The prophecies of the last dawn, the chronicles of—" "Written by whom?" Thorn's mouth worked soundlessly for a moment. The authors are unknown, or deliberately obscured." Arya's power began to glow around her again, but this time it felt different, cleaner, more controlled. What if those texts weren't prophecies at all? What if they were propaganda? The question hung in the air like a challenge. "Impossible," Marcus snarled. "The prophecies have guided our kind for exactly as long as certain wolves have wanted to maintain the status quo," Arya finished. "Tell me, Uncle, Who benefits from keeping our kind bound by the old magic? Who profits from wolves being vulnerable to silver and wolfsbane and territorial limitations? Marcus's face went pale. The humans, Valyrias said quietly, and for the first time since this confrontation began, he sounded uncertain. The ones who hunt us, who've been hunting us for centuries. The ones who've been encouraging our conflicts with each other, Arya continued, pieces falling into place with devastating clarity, feeding information to both sides, making sure we stay divided and weak. She turned to look at each of the betrayers in turn. You thought you were protecting our kind from me, but what if you were actually protecting our enemies from the one wolf who could finally free us? The silence that followed was deafening. The White Wolf prophecy isn't about destroying our kind, she said finally. It's about giving us the power to destroy those who've been controlling us from the shadows. And as the words left her lips, Arya realized they were true. The certainty of it rang through her bones like a bell. The real enemy wasn't Valyrias, wasn't her uncle or the corrupt elder or even Chaol's betrayal. The real enemy was still out there, still pulling strings, still manipulating wolves into fighting each other instead of uniting against the true threat. Which means, Dravane said grimly, this entire conflict has been a distraction. A test, Arya agreed, to see how much of my power I'd reveal when pushed to the breaking point. She looked at Valyrias, who was standing frozen with growing horror on his face. Who's really paying you? She asked softly. Because it isn't just about political power or territorial disputes. Someone else is funding this operation. Someone who wants detailed information about what the White Wolf can do. Valyrias's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. Answer her, Dravane commanded, and his alpha voice carried the weight of absolute authority. Valyrias swallowed hard. I was contacted by an organization. They called themselves the Order of the Silver Dawn. They said they had information about ancient bloodlines, about how to harness the White Wolf's power for the greater good. Humans, Arya whispered. Enhanced humans, Valyrias corrected miserably. Ones who've been using captured wolf magic to extend their lives, to increase their strength. They've been farming us. The revelation hit like a physical blow. Everything they'd been fighting about, territorial disputes, pack politics, ancient debts, had been orchestrated by humans who saw their entire species as livestock. How long? Dravane's voice was deadly quiet. Centuries, maybe longer. Valyrias looked like he might be sick. They said once they had the White Wolf's power, they wouldn't need to harvest other wolves anymore, that it would be cleaner. Arya felt something cold and dangerous settle in her chest. Not rage, something far more controlled and infinitely more deadly. Where are they? I don't know. The contact protocols were, where are they? This time her voice carried harmonics that made the stones themselves vibrate. Valyrias collapsed to his knees, his enhanced wolf submission to power he couldn't begin to understand. The old Blackstone facility, he gasped. 50 miles north, in the mountains. But it's heavily defended, and they have other wolves. Captured ones. They're using them as bait, Arya finished, to draw me in. She looked around the corridor, at the children they'd saved, at the wolves who'd betrayed them, at the mate who stood ready to follow her into hell itself. The real war was just beginning. But first, she had some humans to teach about the dangers of trying to farm a white wolf. Chapter 16. Into the Blackstone Facility. Drawing from the devastating revelation about the Order of the Silver Dawn, Arya stood at the edge of the Blackstone facility 2 days later, watching the compound through high-powered scopes that revealed the true scope of their enemy's operation. It was massive, sprawling, and utterly horrifying. How many? Dravane asked beside her, his voice tight with controlled rage. At least 50 captured wolves that I can sense. she whispered, her enhanced abilities picking up the psychic screams of terror and pain emanating from within. Maybe more in the underground levels. The facility stretched across an entire valley, gleaming white buildings connected by covered walkways surrounded by electrified fences and guard towers, but it was what she could feel beneath the surface that made her stomach turn. Laboratories, surgical suites, holding cells designed specifically for supernatural beings. They're not just harvesting wolf magic, she realized with dawning horror. They're experimenting, trying to find ways to replicate our abilities in human subjects. Through the mate bond, she felt Dravane's surge of protective fury. His wolf was barely contained beneath his skin, golden eyes blazing with the need to tear apart anyone who dared harm their kind. "We go in quiet," he said finally. "Extract as many as we can. Get out before—" The ground beneath them exploded. Arya threw herself sideways as silver-tipped projectiles whistled through the air where they'd been lying. Behind them, she heard the distinctive whine of energy weapons, technology that shouldn't exist. "Ambush!" Dravane snarled, already shifting position. "They knew we were coming." More projectiles, more impossible weapons. And rising from concealed positions all around their vantage point, figures in tactical gear that moved with inhuman speed and precision. Enhanced humans. The Order's foot soldiers. The whole thing was a trap, Arya breathed. Valyrias' information, the location, all of it. "Run!" Dravane commanded, but even as the word left his lips, new enemies appeared to block their escape routes. 20 of them. Maybe 30. All armed with weapons designed specifically to kill or capture supernatural beings. Arya felt her power surge in response to the threat, golden energy crackling around her like armor. But as she prepared to unleash the White Wolf's fury, something wrong happened. The energy flickered, dimmed, like a candle being slowly snuffed out. "What?" she started. "Dampening field," one of the enhanced humans called out, his voice carrying through a tactical radio. "The bloodline suppressors are working perfectly." Bloodline suppressors. Technology designed to neutralize supernatural abilities. They'd been studying captured wolves long enough to develop countermeasures. Arya's power continued to fade, leaving her feeling hollow and strangely fragile, like a wolf suddenly stripped of her claws and fangs. "Arya!" Dravane reached for her, but his own abilities were being affected. His partial shift reversed itself, leaving him looking painfully human. "Take them alive," the team leader commanded. "The Order wants them intact for study." Study. The word sent ice through Arya's veins, because she'd felt the psychic echoes from the captured wolves. She knew what study meant in this context. Vivisection, experimentation, slow, methodical torture designed to unlock the secrets of supernatural physiology. The enhanced humans moved in with military precision, their weapons trained on vital areas. Capture, not kill. Because dead specimens were far less useful than living ones. "I'm sorry," Dravane said quietly as the net closed around them. "For what?" "For not being strong enough to protect you." The words broke something inside her chest. Because this magnificent, powerful alpha, this king who commanded the loyalty of hundreds, thought he'd failed her. "You did protect me," she said fiercely. "You gave me something worth fighting for." One of the enhanced humans stepped closer, some kind of restraint device in his hands. "Enough talking. The Order is very eager to meet you both." As the device closed around her wrists, cold metal that hummed with suppressive energy, Arya felt the last of her power drain away. She was just a woman now, vulnerable, mortal. But as they were hauled to their feet and marched toward the facility, she caught Dravane's eye and saw something that gave her hope. His wolf might be suppressed, but his mind was still working, still planning, still fighting. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. The White Wolf had been captured before, in her grandmother's stories and the old legends, and she'd always found a way to break free.
Chapter 17. The Laboratory of Horrors. 6 hours later, strapped to a medical table in what could only be described as a supernatural torture chamber, Dravane discovered exactly how naive he'd been about human cruelty. The laboratory around him was pristine, clinical, and absolutely horrifying. Glass tanks lined the walls, each containing something that had once been a wolf. Now they were experiments. Beings kept alive through artificial means while their supernatural essence was slowly drained away. Magnificent, isn't it? Dr. Helena Marsh entered the room like she was making grand rounds at a hospital. White coat, clipboard, the kind of professional demeanor that made her work seem almost reasonable. 20 years of research into the supernatural genome. You and your mate are going to help us make incredible breakthroughs. Go to hell, Dravane snarled, testing the restraints that held him down. They were more than just metal. They hummed with the same suppressive energy that had stripped away their abilities. Language, Your Majesty. Dr. Marsh smiled pleasantly. We're going to be spending a lot of time together. I'd prefer we kept things civilized. Through a reinforced window, he could see Arya in the adjacent room. She was conscious, strapped to a similar table, surrounded by technicians who were taking readings with devices he didn't recognize. She looked small, vulnerable, and absolutely furious. What do you want? He demanded. From you? Genetic samples, neural mapping, a complete analysis of alpha physiology. Dr. Marsh consulted her clipboard like they were discussing the weather. From her? Well, she's rather more special, isn't she? She's under my protection. She's the key to everything we've been working toward. The doctor's eyes lit up with fanatic fervor. Do you have any idea what her bloodline represents? The potential applications? Dravane's blood turned to ice. You can't replicate the White Wolf's abilities. They're tied to her specific genetic heritage. Who said anything about replication? Dr. Marsh laughed. We're going to do something much more elegant. We're going to transfer them. The words hit like a physical blow. Transfer? The consciousness transfer protocol has been theoretical until now. But with a subject as powerful as the White Wolf, we can finally test whether supernatural abilities can be extracted from one being and implanted in another. Understanding crashed over him like a tsunami. They weren't planning to study Arya. They were planning to steal her very essence and put it into someone else. The process is still experimental, Dr. Marsh continued conversationally. There's a significant chance the donor won't survive, but the potential benefits to humanity. You're talking about murder. I'm talking about evolution. Humans enhanced with supernatural abilities, no longer dependent on capturing and harvesting your kind. A cleaner, more efficient solution. Through the window, Dravane saw technicians positioning some kind of helmet device over Arya's head. She was struggling against her restraints, her eyes wide with fear and rage. Please, he said, hating himself for begging but willing to do anything to save her. Take me instead. My alpha abilities are impressive but hardly unique. We've studied dozens of alphas over the years. Dr. Marsh shook her head. But there's only one White Wolf, and her power could change everything. A new figure entered Arya's room, elderly, distinguished, wearing expensive clothes that marked him as someone with serious authority. Ah, Dr. Marsh said with satisfaction. Director Reynolds has arrived. He'll be conducting the transfer personally. Transfer to who? Dravane demanded. Himself, naturally. 20 years of research, and he's finally going to reap the benefits. Through the window, Director Reynolds was examining Arya like she was a particularly interesting specimen. His hands moved over the control panels with practiced efficiency, preparing for a procedure that would steal her very soul. You bastards, Dravane whispered. She'll fight you. Even without her powers, she'll do exactly what we want her to do. Because if she doesn't cooperate... Dr. Marsh gestured to another window. Dravane's heart stopped. In a third room, visible through reinforced glass, were the captured wolves he'd sensed when they first arrived. But they weren't just imprisoned, they were being used as leverage. Children. elderly wolves, pregnant females, all strapped to tables identical to his own. "One sign of resistance from your mate," Dr. Marsh said pleasantly, "and we begin the termination sequence. She can watch them die one by one until she decides to cooperate." The absolute cruelty of it stole his breath. They'd found the one thing that would break Arya's resistance, the knowledge that innocent lives hung in the balance. Through the window he saw Director Reynolds approaching Arya with a syringe filled with something that glowed with unnatural light. Preparation for the transfer, and there wasn't a damn thing he could do to stop it. His wolf clawed uselessly against the suppression field. His strength meant nothing against restraints designed by people who'd studied supernatural physiology for decades. For the first time in his life, King Dravane, Alpha of Alphas, ruler of the Northern Territories, was completely, utterly powerless, and the woman he loved was about to be murdered so that monsters could steal her gifts.
Chapter 18. The Moment of Truth. Meanwhile, in the adjacent room, Arya stared up at Director Reynolds and realized she was looking at the face of true evil. Not the passionate cruelty of someone like Valyrias, but the cold, calculated malice of a man who saw other beings as nothing more than resources to be exploited. "Miss Sinclair," he said pleasantly, preparing the glowing syringe with steady hands. "Or may I call you the White Wolf? I've been looking forward to meeting you for a very long time. The feeling isn't mutual. I'm sure it isn't, but I hope you'll come to understand the importance of what we're doing here." He checked the readouts on several machines, making small adjustments. Humanity has been at the mercy of supernatural beings for millennia, always the prey, never the predator. Today, that changes. Through the reinforced window, Arya could see Dravane strapped to his own table, surrounded by technicians with instruments she didn't want to identify. The sight of him helpless and furious made something primal and protective surge in her chest. But it was the third window that made her blood freeze. The captured wolves. So many of them. All innocent, all depending on her to save them. Clever, isn't it? Reynolds followed her gaze. "We've found that supernatural beings are remarkably motivated by the welfare of others. Unlike humans, you seem incapable of pure selfishness. Some might call that a strength. I call it a weakness to be exploited." He moved closer with the syringe. "This will make the transfer process more efficient, less traumatic for your consciousness as it's extracted." Extracted. Like her very soul was just another resource to be harvested. "What happens to me afterward?" "Honestly, we're not certain. The consciousness transfer is still experimental. Previous subjects have, well, let's say the donor rarely survives intact." His smile was apologetic but utterly without remorse. "But think of the greater good. Your sacrifice will benefit all of humanity." Arya closed her eyes, feeling the weight of impossible choices. Let them steal her power, and she might save the captured wolves, but she'd also unleash the White Wolf's abilities on a man who would use them to subjugate her entire species. Resist, and innocent wolves would die while she watched. What would my grandmother do? The thought came unbidden, followed by a memory she hadn't recalled in years. Her grandmother's voice, telling one of her stories about the White Wolf. "Remember, little one, the White Wolf's greatest power was never her magic. It was her ability to choose hope over fear, even when all seemed lost." Hope over fear. Arya opened her eyes and looked directly at Director Reynolds. "You're making a mistake." "Am I? You think my power comes from my bloodline, from some genetic quirk you can cut out and transplant." She smiled, and for the first time since her capture, it was genuine. "But you're wrong. Enlighten me. The White Wolf's power doesn't come from her blood. It comes from her choices." Arya's voice grew stronger, more confident. From her willingness to sacrifice herself for others, from her refusal to let fear control her actions. Reynolds paused, the syringe inches from her arm. "Philosophical nonsense." "Is it?" Tell me, Director, when was the last time you chose someone else's welfare over your own? When did you last act out of love instead of ambition? Sentiment is a luxury I can't afford. Sentiment is the source of everything you're trying to steal. Arya met his eyes without flinching. You can take my blood, dissect my brain, analyze every cell in my body. But you'll never understand what makes the White Wolf powerful because you've never felt what I feel. And what's that? Love. The word came out like a weapon. Love for my mate. Love for my people. Love strong enough to break any binding, overcome any obstacle, defeat any enemy. As she spoke, something impossible began to happen. The suppression field around her flickered, just for a moment but long enough for her to feel a spark of her true power returning. Not much, but maybe enough. Impossible, Reynolds breathed, checking his instruments. The dampening field is at maximum strength. Your technology can suppress supernatural abilities, Arya said quietly, but it can't suppress the human heart. And the White Wolf's power? It's rooted in something deeper than magic. The spark grew stronger. Golden light began to seep through the suppression field like water through cracks in a dam. How? Because you made the same mistake every enemy of our kind has made for centuries. You assumed we were just animals with unusual abilities. The light around her intensified and the restraints holding her down began to smoke. But we're not. We're beings capable of love, sacrifice, and hope. And those things are stronger than any magic you could ever steal. The suppression field collapsed with a sound like breaking glass. Arya sat up on the table, power radiating from her in waves that made the very air shimmer with golden fire. Every instrument in the room began to overload. Every restraint holding the captured wolves started to dissolve. And in the adjacent room, she felt Dravane's abilities returning as her power reached out through their mate bond to shatter his own suppression field. No, Reynolds whispered. This is impossible. Nothing is impossible, Arya said, rising to her feet like an avenging angel. When you have something worth fighting for. The real battle was just beginning, but for the first time since their capture, the White Wolf was free and she was furious. Chapter 19. The Tide Turns. Emerging from the shattered suppression field like a phoenix reborn, Arya felt her power explode outward in waves that turned the sterile laboratory into a battleground of golden fire. Every restraint holding a captured wolf dissolved under her fury. Every instrument designed to torture her kind cracked and sparked. Impossible! Director Reynolds stumbled backward as his precious machines overloaded one by one. The dampening field was perfect. Your mistake, Arya said, stepping off the medical table with lethal grace, was thinking you could cage lightning. Through the reinforced window, she saw Dravane breaking free of his own restraints with strength that bent steel. Their mate bond hummed with shared power, his alpha dominance amplifying her abilities, her White Wolf magic enhancing his. They were unstoppable together. Security! Reynolds screamed into his comm device. All units to Laboratory 7! The subjects have... Arya's hand closed around his throat, cutting off his words. Not to kill, though the temptation was overwhelming, but to show him exactly how powerless he truly was. Where are the other facilities? Her voice carried harmonics that made the walls vibrate. How many more places like this exist? I'll never... You will. Golden light poured from her eyes, and suddenly she could see his thoughts laid bare. Memories of other installations, other captured wolves, a network of horror that spanned continents, 17 facilities, thousands of prisoners, decades of systematic torture. The scope of it staggered her. You monster, she whispered. Before Reynolds could respond, the laboratory doors exploded inward. Enhanced soldiers poured through the openings, their weapons crackling with energy designed to disrupt supernatural abilities. But they weren't prepared for what they faced. Arya moved like her grandmother's stories had always promised the White Wolf would. Not just fast, but fluid, unstoppable. She flowed between the soldiers like water through a sieve, each touch of her hands sending their weapons into sparking ruin. Behind her, Dravane fought with the fury of an alpha protecting his mate. Claws extended, eyes blazing gold, every strike precise and devastating. But it was when they moved together that their enemies truly understood what they faced. The mate bond allowed them to fight as one entity, Arya clearing a path while Dravane guarded her back, his strength covering her moments of vulnerability, while her power shielded them both from the soldiers' increasingly desperate attacks. "Fall back!" someone screamed. "Fall back! They're too strong!" "No!" Reynolds pulled out a device Arya didn't recognize, something that hummed with malevolent energy. "Activate the Omega Protocol. Flood the entire facility." Through their bond, Arya felt Dravane's surge of horror. That's concentrated wolfsbane gas, enough to kill every supernatural being in the complex, including all the prisoners they'd come to save. He'd rather murder everyone than lose his prize, she realized. The device in Reynolds' hand began to glow. In 30 seconds, maybe less, poison would flood the ventilation system. The captured wolves, already weakened by months or years of imprisonment, wouldn't survive. Arya had a choice: use her power to stop the device, or continue fighting the soldiers who were between them and the exit. She couldn't do both. "Go," she told Dravane. "Get the prisoners to safety." "I'm not leaving you. You're not leaving me. You're trusting me." She met his eyes, pouring all her love and determination into that look. "I can stop the gas, but I need you to save them." For a heartbeat, his alpha instincts warred with his trust in her abilities. Then he nodded, understanding passing between them faster than words. 30 seconds, he said. More than enough. As Dravane charged toward the prisoner-holding areas, Arya turned to face Reynolds and his device. The countdown was already at 15 seconds. 14. 13. 12. She could feel the malevolent energy building in the device. Taste the promise of death it carried. 11. 10. 9. "You can't stop it," Reynolds said with insane satisfaction. "Even the white wolf can't. Watch me." Arya placed her hands on the device and let her power flow into it, not to destroy, to transform, to take the concentrated death it carried and turn it into something else entirely. 8, 7, 6. The device fought her. Its creators had built safeguards specifically to prevent supernatural interference. 5, 4. But they hadn't counted on the White Wolf's true gift. Not just breaking bindings, but rewriting them, taking what was meant for evil and bending it toward hope. 3, 2. The device stopped glowing. Instead of poison gas, it began to emit something else, healing energy that would strengthen the captured wolves instead of killing them. 1. "No," Reynolds whispered, as his ultimate weapon became an instrument of salvation. Arya smiled. "Yes." And in the distance, she heard something that made her heart soar, the howls of newly freed wolves celebrating their liberation. They'd done it. Against impossible odds, they'd actually done it. But as the facility's alarms wailed around them, Arya knew this was just the beginning. 17 facilities, thousands of prisoners. The real war was just getting started.
Chapter 20. Liberation and Planning. Racing through corridors that reeked of fear and antiseptic, Dravane felt Arya's power flowing through their bond like liquid fire. She'd stopped the Omega Protocol. He could sense the transformation of poison into healing energy. But now came the harder task: getting 57 traumatized wolves out of a military-grade facility while it was in full lockdown. "This way," he guided a group of former prisoners toward the emergency exits, his enhanced senses mapping the safest route through the chaos. "Stay close. Don't separate." The wolves he was leading were in various states of physical and psychological damage. Some could barely walk. Others flinched at every sound. All of them carried the haunted look of beings who'd been systematically tortured. The humans will pay for this. Every last one. But first, survival. Then revenge. Alpha, a young female wolf, barely more than a pup, stumbled against him. I can't. My legs won't. I've got you. He swept her up in his arms, ignoring the way she trembled at his touch. Trust would take time to rebuild. What's your name? Luna Blackwood. Her voice was barely a whisper. They took me 3 months ago, from Portland. You're safe now, Luna, I promise. Through the facility's PA system, Director Reynolds' voice echoed with increasing desperation. All units converge on Laboratory 7. Do not allow the subjects to escape. Repeat. The announcement cut off abruptly. Arya's doing, no doubt. How many more? Asked Marcus, an older wolf who'd lost an eye to the humans' experiments but still moved with lethal grace. 15 in the lower levels, maybe 20. Dravane checked his mental count. We get everyone out. No one gets left behind. What about the humans? The ones who did this to us? The question carried weight beyond its words. These wolves had suffered unimaginable trauma. They deserved justice. They deserved revenge. But they also deserved to survive this day. The humans will answer for their crimes, Dravane promised, but our priority is getting you all to safety. As they reached the main exit, Dravane's enhanced hearing picked up the sound of vehicles approaching. Multiple engines, military coordination, reinforcements. They've called in backup, Marcus observed grimly. We're trapped. Through the bond, Dravane felt Arya's surge of determination. She was coming, fighting her way through whatever obstacles stood between her and their escape route. But would she make it in time? Alpha. Luna tugged at his shirt. There's another way out. The humans. They talked about it sometimes. A service tunnel that leads to the old mining complex. Where? Sub-basement, past the surgical suites. Her voice dropped to a whisper. But there are things down there. Experiments that went wrong. Things that used to be wolves. Failed test subjects. Beings driven insane by torture and transformation. The choice was brutal but simple. Face the unknown horrors below, or try to fight through a military response team while protecting traumatized civilians. Sub-basement it is, he decided. As they descended into the depths of the facility, the scent signatures around them changed. Less antiseptic, more wrong, like meat left too long in the sun, like madness given physical form. Stay together, he commanded softly. Whatever we encounter down here, we face it as a pack. Behind them, explosions echoed from the upper levels. Arya was making her presence felt. Ahead, something howled in the darkness, a sound that had once been wolf, but was now something else entirely. Almost there, Luna whispered. Just past the containment chambers. Containment chambers. Where they kept the experiments too dangerous to terminate. Dravane's wolf bristled with protective instincts as shapes moved in the shadows ahead. Whatever the humans had created down here, it stood between his people and freedom. Luna, he said quietly, when I give the signal, take the others and run for the tunnel. Don't look back. What about you? I'll hold them off. But before he could give that signal, golden light blazed in the corridor behind them. Arya's voice rang out, strong and clear and absolutely furious. Nobody runs. Nobody fights alone. Her power washed over them like warm honey mixed with lightning. We end this. All of it. Right here. Right now. And as the failed experiments emerged from their containment chambers, things that were part wolf, part machine, part nightmare, Dravane felt something he hadn't expected. Hope. Because whatever these humans had created, whatever horrors they'd unleashed, they'd never face the white wolf and her alpha fighting side by side. The final battle was about to begin.
Chapter 21. United. We stand. Descending into the facility's hellish depths with power crackling around her like divine retribution, Arya saw the true scope of humanity's crimes against her kind. The failed experiments shuffling toward them weren't just torture victims. They were warnings about what the Order planned for every captured wolf. My God, she breathed, taking in the grotesque fusion of flesh and machinery before them. What did they do to you? The lead creature, something that might once have been a proud alpha, turned hollow, cybernetic eyes toward her. When it spoke, its voice was a harmony of organic pain and digital malfunction. Help us, it pleaded. Can't die. Can't live. Arya's heart shattered. These beings were trapped between life and death, their wolf spirits bound to bodies that had been systematically mutilated and rebuilt. I'll try, she promised. Arya, no. Dravane moved protectively in front of the rescued wolves. We don't know if they're still infectious. If whatever was done to them can spread, they're still our people, she said firmly. Broken, tortured, but still ours. She stepped forward, ignoring the way the cyborg wolves twitched and sparked. Her power reached out tentatively, testing the bindings that held their fractured souls to their mechanical prisons. Complex, layered, designed to be irreversible, but not unbreakable. Everyone stand back, she commanded. This is going to require everything I have. The white wolf, one of the creatures wheezed, prophecy, spoke, of you. Free us, please. Arya closed her eyes and let her power build. Not the controlled energy she'd been using, but everything. Every drop of magic in her bloodline, every gift her grandmother had passed down, every ounce of love and rage and determination that defined her. Golden light exploded from her skin like a miniature sun. The power flowed into the cyborg wolves, unraveling the technological bindings one by one. Where machinery met flesh, her magic worked like the world's gentlest surgeon, separating what belonged from what had been forced. This one was Rebecca Morris, taken from Denver 2 years ago, mother of 3. This one was Samuel Cross, beta from the Montana territories, captured defending his pack. Each name, each story, each life stolen and twisted by human cruelty only strengthened her resolve. It's working, Dravane said in amazement. The machinery is dissolving. But as the technology fell away, Arya realized the true horror. The wolves underneath were dying. The machinery hadn't just imprisoned them. It had been keeping them alive long past what their tortured bodies could endure. She had a choice. Free their spirits and let them find peace in death, or find a way to heal damage that should have been impossible to repair. I can heal them, she said. But it will take everything, and I mean everything. Through their bond, she felt Dravane's immediate protest. You'll burn yourself out, maybe permanently. Maybe. Arya, they're counting on me. She looked at the wolves she'd come to save, the rescued prisoners, the failed experiments, even Dravane himself. All of them. Every wolf who's ever been captured. Every pack that's ever lived in fear of hunters. This is why the white wolf exists. Not to preserve her own power, but to use it when it matters most. Understanding passed between them. This wasn't just about saving a few dozen wolves. This was about proving that their kind would never abandon their own. That love was stronger than technology. That hope could triumph over the darkest evil. Together? Dravane asked. Together. He took her hand, and their powers merged completely, his alpha strength anchoring her abilities, her white wolf magic flowing through him like liquid starlight. The healing that followed was beyond anything either of them had thought possible. Flesh regrew, bones mended. Spirits that had been fractured by years of torture slowly knitted themselves back together. When it was over, 17 wolves stood before them, whole, healthy, and free. Thank you, Rebecca Morris whispered, tears streaming down a face that was once again purely her own. "Thank you." But as Arya swayed on her feet, drained by the massive expenditure of power, she knew this was only the beginning. 17 facilities, she reminded them all. Thousands more prisoners. "Then we'd better get started," Samuel Cross said grimly, "because now they know we're coming." Around them, the facility's emergency lighting cast dancing shadows on the walls. In the distance, sirens wailed as reinforcements arrived too late to stop what had already been accomplished. The war between humans and wolves had just escalated beyond anything either side had imagined. But as Arya looked around at the faces of the wolves she'd saved, scarred but unbroken, traumatized but determined, she knew they would win. Because they had something the Order of the Silver Dawn would never understand. They had each other, and sometimes that was enough to move mountains, or bring down empires built on cruelty and fear.
Chapter 22. The Final Confrontation. 6 months later, standing before the assembled council of all packs in the great hall of Shadow Peak, Arya felt the weight of history settling around her shoulders like a mantle made of starlight and promises. The war with the Order of the Silver Dawn was over. The 17 facilities had been destroyed. Thousands of wolves had been freed. But now came the harder task, building something new from the ashes of the old world. "The treaty is ready for signing," Elder Morrison announced, his voice carrying across the vast chamber filled with representatives from every pack in North America. "The Accords of the White Wolf will establish new laws for human supernatural relations." Beside her, Dravane squeezed her hand gently. Through their mate bond, she felt his pride, his love, and his absolute confidence in her ability to lead their people into this uncertain future. "Are you ready for this?" he murmured. "As ready as anyone can be for rewriting the rules of existence," she replied with a smile that held only the faintest tremor of nerves. The treaty spread before them was unprecedented. For the first time in history, humans and supernaturals would coexist under agreed-upon laws. The Order's leadership had been tried and convicted. Reparations were being paid, and most importantly, new protections were in place to prevent another systematic harvest of their kind. But it was the final clause that made Arya's heart race with possibility. The establishment of the White Wolf Sanctuary System, safe havens for any supernatural being seeking protection, healing, or simply a place to call home. "Your Majesty," a young reporter called from the press section, "what's next for the White Wolf and the Lycan King?" Arya looked at Dravane, and the answer came without hesitation. "We build something better," she said. "We create a world where no wolf ever has to choose between hiding what they are and being hunted for it." The signing ceremony was brief, but profound. Each signature represented not just an agreement, but a promise that the horrors of the past would never be repeated. As the last signature dried, spontaneous cheering erupted throughout the hall. Wolves, humans, and representatives from other supernatural communities all celebrating together. "It's done," Dravane said, pulling her into his arms as cameras flashed around them. "We actually did it." "We're just getting started," Arya replied, then rose on her toes to kiss him with all the passion and promise of their shared future. The crowd erupted in fresh cheers, but all she could focus on was this moment. This man who'd seen her worth when no one else could, who'd stood with her through battles that should have destroyed them both. "I love you," she whispered against his lips. "I love you too, my White Wolf, my queen, my everything." As confetti fell around them like snow, Arya caught sight of familiar faces in the crowd. Marcus, her uncle, now serving a life sentence for his crimes, but somehow looking more at peace than she'd ever seen him. Cale, stripped of his rank but working to earn forgiveness through service to the refugees they'd rescued. Valyrias, dead by his own hand rather than face trial for his betrayals. And throughout the hall, dozens of wolves they'd saved from the Order's facilities. Healthy now, free, building new lives in a world that was finally ready to accept them. "Your Majesty." A small voice drew her attention downward. Luna Blackwood, the young wolf they'd rescued from the first facility, stood beside the podium with something clutched in her hands. "What is it, sweetheart?" "It's for you, from all of us." Luna held out a crown woven from silver and moonstone, but it was the inscription that made Arya's breath catch. "For the white wolf who chose love over fear, hope over hatred, and showed us all that sometimes the greatest strength is knowing when to trust." As Dravane placed the crown on her head, Arya felt the truth of her transformation settle into her bones. She'd begun this journey as an outcast, a burden, a wolf too broken to belong anywhere. She was ending it as a queen, a leader, a symbol of what their kind could become when they stopped fighting each other and started fighting for each other. "Long live the White Wolf," someone shouted. "Long live the Lycan King," came the response. But as the cheers echoed around them, Arya and Dravane only had eyes for each other, because in the end, none of the titles or ceremonies mattered as much as this: the love they'd found in the midst of chaos, the partnership they'd forged in the fires of adversity, the future they'd built together one choice at a time. The White Wolf and her shadow, the Queen and her king, and they were just getting started. Epilogue. 5 years later. In the gardens of the White Wolf Sanctuary outside Denver, Arya watched her 3-year-old daughter chase butterflies through the wildflower meadow, while Dravane pushed their twin sons on the swings nearby. The sound of children's laughter mixed with the distant howls of wolves who'd found safety within these protected borders. "Mama," little Camilla called, her silver hair gleaming in the afternoon sun. "Look what I found." She held up a caterpillar, her golden eyes, so like her father's, bright with wonder and discovery. "Beautiful baby," Arya said, kneeling to examine the tiny creature. "What do you think will happen to it?" "It'll grow wings and fly away," Camilla said, with the absolute certainty of a child who'd grown up hearing stories about transformation and change. "Just like the wolves you and Daddy saved. Just like the wolves you and Daddy saved." Arya's heart swelled with pride and love, and the deep satisfaction of work well done. In 5 years, they'd established 47 sanctuaries across 3 continents. They'd negotiated peace treaties with 12 human governments. They'd created a world where supernatural beings could live openly, safely, and with dignity. But more than that, they'd created a family, a pack, a future built on love instead of fear. Arya. Dravane appeared beside her, their sons perched on his broad shoulders like tiny alpha princes surveying their domain. "The council meeting starts in an hour."
"Do we have to?" she asked with exaggerated reluctance. "Can't we just stay here and watch our children discover the world?" "We could," he said, his voice warm with understanding. "But there are 3 new sanctuary proposals to review, and the delegation from Japan wants to discuss expansion into the Pacific territories." Arya sighed, but it was a contented sound. The work of building a better world never ended. But that was okay. She'd learned to find joy in the journey, rather than rushing toward some imaginary finish line. Besides, Dravane added with a grin that still made her pulse skip after all these years, "We have dinner reservations at that little place in town. Just the 2 of us." "You mean the place where we can actually finish a conversation without someone needing juice or having a diaper crisis?" "That's the one." As they gathered their children and headed back toward the main house, a sprawling complex that served as both their family home and the administrative center for the global sanctuary network, Arya caught sight of the portrait hanging in the front hall. It showed a young woman with defiant eyes and hidden strength, standing beside a powerful man who'd learned to see worth where others saw only weakness. The White Wolf and the Lycan King in the early days of their partnership, when everything was dangerous and uncertain and absolutely impossible. "Do you ever miss it?" she asked Dravane quietly. "The simplicity of when it was just us against the world?" "Never," he said without hesitation. Because now it's us with the world. All of it. The good and the bad, the beautiful and the broken. The wolves who need saving and the children who'll inherit everything we've built. He was right, of course. This was better. Messier, more complicated, infinitely more challenging. But better. As little Camilla and the twins ran ahead, their laughter echoing through the halls where refugees and politicians and activists all worked together toward the same goal, Arya felt the rightness of it settle into her bones. This was what the White Wolf prophecy had really been about. Not some mythical savior who would fix everything with magic and violence, but a choice. A decision to stop accepting the world as it was and start working toward the world as it could be. She'd made that choice. They'd all made that choice. And look what they'd built together. Ready for the next adventure? Dravane asked as they approached the council chambers. Arya smiled, taking his hand as naturally as breathing, and stepped forward into whatever came next. Always, she said. Always. Because that's what love was, in the end. Not a destination, but a decision to keep choosing each other, keep building together, keep believing that tomorrow could be better than today. The White Wolf and her shadow, still fighting the good fight, still winning.